some organizer came down to help out in a congressional campaign, and he's a labor guy, and I was in Young Democrats in high school. And he was doing this voter registration, and I mean taking names and serious kind of voter registration business. And then on election day, get out to vote. They'd call 3 times in the morning. If they hadn't voted yet, they'd send a car to their house. So right away I said, I'm with these folks, because they were serious. And participation to me was the main thing. You know, there was nothing wrong with the American political system except low participation rates. So from that day forward, you know, I've worked with unions, and straight out of college went to the J.P. Stevens organizing campaign, which is where this started. This is the 10% and this is the 80%, you know, and this is when the wealth gap really began, 1977, the year we lost labor law reform. 5 weeks of filibuster by the conservatives who don't want people to get together, who don't want people to freely associate, who just hate unions. And you saw, I don't know whether you saw in the Guardian newspaper earlier this week, they uncovered this plan to get union members to quit paying dues. Right. Yeah. So, you know, they'll stop at nothing. I mean, they're just, it's anti-democratic. It's against the principle. We should be moving forward. We should be getting more rights. And we've seen nothing but backtracking ever since that 77. So, I really think we have to resuscitate the National Labor Relations Board. Used to have an economic division of economic research, but in the Red Scare of the 50s, you know, they thought it was a bunch of Reds, so they killed it. But I really think for the new economy and new occupations, we really need to, and unions need this, because they have to see where the organizing possibilities are. So that J.P. Stevens campaign I worked on, we were losing 2,000 members a month, textile workers union. They merged with the clothing workers, and that didn't really help. All these jobs were gone. And you know, Trump is kind of right about trade, but for the wrong reason. You know, he thinks they're bad trade deals. These jobs were long gone before the trade deals. These jobs were gone. And I met people when I went abroad for the AFL-CIO in 1984. I came face to face with the global economy. It wasn't very pretty, you know. I started organizing first in Turkey and then moved on to Indonesia. In Indonesia, I joined the softball team. And one of the guys on my team was from Nike, and he said, "What do you do here?" I said, "Well, the American unions have a small office to help the Indonesian workers." And he said, "I'm your worst nightmare." And I shrugged it off, thinking it's the usual banter you get into when you identify yourself as a union person. Then I got a human rights grant from USAID to monitor compliance with the 86-cent a day minimum wage in Indonesia. And these Koreans and Taiwanese producing for Nike and Reebok and all the others, they were cheating on that, cheating on 86 cents a day. So I paid close attention. The remaining 3.5 years I was in Indonesia, I watched those factories. And there was an uprising, because when we got that human rights study, the report, 50% non-compliance with 86 cents a day, it ignited a firestorm. You know, I was pleasantly surprised that in Suharto's Indonesia, he let newspapers print this, you know, pictures of workers in the streets, you know, demanding this miserable minimum wage. So anyway, the USAID, who gave me the money, the local aid person got a call from the Nike guy, and the Nike guy said, "What are you giving money to this guy for? He's making us look bad." So, you know, I never thought I'd get another nickel from USAID, because I thought they were just kind of, they'd say it's probably better not to fund this guy. On top of the $6,000 grant they gave me early on, they gave me $650,000 to do surveyors of workers. 220 surveyors in the field for 2.5 years. The number of strikes quadrupled. So the minimum wage went up to $2.50. And you know, this is kind of action that you can do if you know you get government support. And these brave USAID people, you know, their performance reviews are written by the embassy side. The embassy side didn't like me at all, you know, because I was a troublemaker. And in fact, the government told me not to be, you know, consorting with the independent union, which was not allowed. Independent union was banned, but I was talking to them anyway. So by law, they said I had to work with the official union. Well, I found a workaround. they had a women's auxiliary. So I shifted all my funds, 90% of my funds from the old guard who were just, placeholders in there, really weren't worried about worker rights, to the women's auxiliary who never had really even influence, but they became real, battle-hardened organizers. So that was a pleasure. And I tell you what, if this election, if you care about character and values, I loved this job. I could have gone on to Thailand or the Philippines or someplace after Indonesia, but I quit to stay with this movement in Indonesia. I followed these 8 shoe factories for the next 5 years. I stayed in touch by fax and phone, and it took all that time until Kathy Lee Gifford was dragged out on the world stage. You remember that, right? Charlie Koenig nailed her. And then my phone started to ring, and journalists were saying, doesn't Michael Jordan make a lot more money off this stuff than Kathy Lee? And I said, oh yeah, I've got 5 years of research in my in-law's basement here. Come on over and look at it. And then Nike started to get the heat. And you know who bailed them out? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton gave them a get-out-of-jail-free card, which is no surprise to us, I guess, because this unfettered free trade, is something the Democrats bought into. Who ever thought of this would be a good idea to have trade with countries where they imprison trade unionists, where human rights and religious people are thrown in jail? This is not going to work out very well, and it didn't. So that's where Trump is kind of right about trade not working out, but it goes back longer than these bad trade deals. They may have been exacerbated the situation. But let me tell you about AMSC right down the road here in Devens. 2011, they had their technology stolen by their biggest customer, a Chinese company, Sinovel. And they went from 900 brothers and sisters to 200 brothers and sisters at that factory in no time because their biggest customer ripped off their technology. They were so brazen, this Chinese company sold some of these wind turbines back to the Commonwealth. So they were pretty sloppy, and they got caught. And after 7 years, the Department of Justice had a criminal case just decided last January, $800 million. The fines may be up to $4 billion. But these workers out in Devens won't get paid unless they win civil cases in China. And you might say, well, good luck with that. Except, Trump has made intellectual property theft kind of a front burner issue. So I'm hopeful that these workers will get paid. And what aggravates me about this story is that nobody from the House Energy and Commerce Committee thought to call a press conference and say, let's call the CEO and some workers down here and say, hey, this is why we have this regulation. This is why we have the Department of Justice out at AMSC. I talked to these people. They were very happy with the Department of Justice, really worked this case for 7 years and won for them. The first ever intellectual property theft case of a Chinese company being found guilty. So I'm very happy to talk with them and but annoyed that nobody in Washington saw the opportunity because, the Republicans have so demonized government and regulation, the whole idea of government, that when we win something, we've got to stand up and say it, And when we lose something, like the Walmart case, some unions, the teachers and the electrical workers' pension funds sued the board of Walmart because they had been bribing people. There was a Pulitzer Prize winning story in the New York Times bribing Mexican officials to get speedier permits and whatever in Mexico for 7 years, tens of millions of dollars. And so these pension funds, union pension funds, had sued the board saying, how come you didn't know this was going on, And this Delaware court threw the case out. This is an outrage. And so, again, somebody from the Democratic caucus should have called some of these pension fund people to Washington and said, this is unbelievable that the Delaware court would throw this case out. So this is what I'm all about. I'm all about being vocal. And, when you win something, look at the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This is our anti-bribery statute. $8 billion it's taken in just since George W. Bush dusted it off because it had been written in the 70s, but it wasn't used. But this is $8 billion just since 2008. So, we have to start saying the government is good and government can deliver for the American people, just to counter what the Republicans have been doing. And yes, sir.
aspects of the national budget are so heavily weighted to the military, producing more jets and tanks and fighting wars that nobody's fighting anymore, and the big threats are cybersecurity.
Yeah.
To attack our infrastructure. Do you have a plan for how that could shift so that we're keeping good jobs but not producing tanks, which nobody uses anymore?
Yeah, not a detailed plan, but we have to discuss Afghanistan. I spend a year about 100 miles south of Kabul on a base with our servicemen and women, and 2012, 2013, training prosecutors and judges. And I'll tell you, we don't belong in Afghanistan with military troops. We can send NGOs there, and they can do a much better job than these troops can, and we're upping the drone strikes, right? And we're tamping down the information that flows to the public. Now, Congress can still find out, but the Pentagon is now holding back information on casualties. These are Afghan army casualties and desertions that we used to be able to get. So I want to have hearings on Afghanistan, and I think that could be the beginning of something that reordering these priorities, because once the American people, if they hear what I have to tell about Afghanistan and how, you know, we're buddied up with these warlords over there in order to kind of keep the peace, well, you can either have reform or you can have peace, and we've chosen peace. We've given tens of millions of dollars to the mining ministry in Afghanistan. There's still no mining law. There's still no mining law after we've been there 17 years. This is ridiculous, you know, and it's unsustainable. And you're right about, you know, switching some of these priorities. And I think I don't want to cut the defense budget and hurt, you know, the rank and file soldiers, and you know, we really have to take care of these folks. But you know, there's a lot of fat in there, and I think you know, waste, fraud, and abuse we've got to deal with urgently. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, brother. Thanks, brother.
Take care.